You're listening to the True North Success Podcast. Real stories of personal, professional, and financial wins from Alberta's best. With your hosts, Gary Ma and Amy Kim.
Hi, everybody. Welcome back to the show today. My special guest is James Papatzimas. James is a medical science liaison in the cardiovascular and emerging therapy areas division at Novo Nordisk, Canada, supporting improved patient access and outcomes across Western Canada. Previously, he was a principal scientist, level 1, at Novartis Biomedical Research and Emerville, where he worked on therapeutic development for infectious, rare, and neglected diseases in cross-functional teams. It's a real pleasure having him on the show today. Welcome, James.
Thanks, Amy. It's an honor to be here.
Awesome. So, James, I gave a quick overview of your success, but can you fit in the detail about you and your business?
Yeah, absolutely. So I've got a pretty long-winded story, but I'm originally here from Canada. I grew up in Eastern Ontario, and my majority of my studies were actually in chemistry. And so I moved to Nova Scotia and did an undergraduate degree in chemistry at St. Francis Xavier University. And then I did my PhD at the University of Calgary, and that was in organic chemistry. When I graduated, my PhD was in 2020, right in the thick of COVID, if we all remember. And unfortunately, finding a job in Canada was fairly difficult at that time. So I did a little bit of extra training, and I went and did a postdoctoral fellowship at the University of California, Berkeley, in Berkeley, California. And that was in chemical biology under supervision of Dr. Dan Nomura. I was there for about 2.5 years. And during that time, we collaborated closely with Novartis, who you already mentioned. So they have a research site in Emeryville, California, just outside of San Francisco. And at the end of my postdoc, I actually started working with them. We worked on some rare and neglected tropical diseases. So I got to work on Chagas disease and malaria using my chemistry background, actually at the bench. And so I spent 2 awesome years there, but it just came to about time where my family and I were ready to come back to Canada and look for work up here. And so in July of 2024 is actually when I transitioned out of the R&D space and moved into medical affairs. And that's when I started my medical science liaison, or MSL, role with Novo Nordisk, based here in Calgary, but covering the Western provinces. And yeah, like you mentioned, I'm in the cardiorenal space now. So really looking at our cardiovascular and kidney disease areas.
Awesome. And could you tell us more about your main clients? Is it more institutional or is it more individuals?
Yeah, and so Novo Nordisk is a multinational global company based in Copenhagen, Denmark, with a long history actually rooted here in Canada, first starting in developing insulins and working in the diabetes space, type 2 diabetes mostly, and then expanding into obesity and cardiorenal disease. And so in my work, that liaison between the company and physicians here in Canada, in the provinces that I cover. And so working very closely with cardiologists, nephrologists, a number of other healthcare providers, and then really gaining sort of field insights into the current therapies that we have on the market, but also some of our pipeline, and working with the company and developing different strategies and different ways to try and improve patient access. We do a lot of medical education with both these healthcare providers that I mentioned, as well as their sort of clinical support teams, but also we support a lot of clinical research. So running clinical trials here in Canada and getting new investigational products to Canadian patients. And so that's a lot of kind of my role and where I sit in the company.
I see. So, there are a lot of competitions in that cardiovascular medical industry. What do you feel really sets you apart, and what comes natural to you that may others find challenging?
Yeah, for sure. So, I mean, cardiovascular disease is still one of the biggest killers globally, but also here in Canada, unfortunately, for patients. And it's great to see, the amount of research and funds that go into developing new therapies. And there have been amazing kind of landmark discoveries over the last 20 to 50 years. But what's really nice and exciting, I guess, about my role is Novo Nordisk was one of the first companies to delve into the cardiovascular space with GLP-1 receptor agonists. So a new type of therapy, which originally was kind of implemented to treat diabetes and then kind of expanded into the obesity realm, and is now really seeing lots of things in the cardiovascular space. So being, the first in class really makes you the best in class at the time. And so it's been amazing to sort of see the explosion of interest around, treating cardiovascular disease potentially more holistically. And so looking at it from almost like a cardio, kidney, or metabolic disease state. And I feel like a lot of the work that we've done, both here in Canada and globally at Novo Nordisk, has really been supportive of that. And so it's been really awesome to be part of that role. But what I get to do is really bring a lot of my, previous experiences into the role as well. And so when you work in R&D, you're very early on in the pipeline or in the patent lifespan, if you will. You're developing new therapies, trying to decide which ones should be pushed forward, which ones could be clinical candidates. And you're really starting to think about, okay, when are these patents going to start? When do we start that clock? And where I am now is much later, but it's also really great because I'm at the translational stage. And so from my early experiences, I get to bring that knowledge as well and help train the healthcare providers, patients, different advocacy groups on, why these new therapies could be adding an additional benefit on top of the standard of care. Standard of care is amazing, but it still has some unmet need. And so Novo's really trying to do some cool new ways of looking at that and how we can sort of tackle that residual risk for patients, which is something I'm really proud of. Yeah.
Awesome. Could you give us a little bit examples that how they are a little bit different than those traditional conventional treatment?
Yeah, for sure. So I think that one of the biggest things we're learning still about GLP-1 receptor agonists, GLP-1 therapies, is that there's no kind of silver bullet, or there's no one real mechanism of action that's benefiting to patients, which seems like, well, do you really understand what's happening? And the answer is there's a lot that's going on, a lot of benefit for patients in this realm. So some patients obviously will benefit from those classical kind of diabetes aspects where they get glycemic control. And some patients will benefit from weight management, but there are great new evidences coming out showing that it has a direct cardiovascular impact, a direct benefit to the kidneys. And so what this does is it really gets to now explode into a whole new realm. It's not just, a weight loss medication. It's not just a cardiovascular medication, but it can really help in a lot of different areas. And classically, most therapies are actually developed to kind of do one thing, but they're really good at it. That's not, that's just the way we used to develop medicines. And that still is a great, really effective way. Even back in my R&D stages, you really want to try and do a targeted approach. And while GLP-1 receptor agonists target one thing, they actually end up doing a lot of other things, and good things too. You don't want a therapy that can target one thing, but do lots of other things that are bad. And so there's lots of cool things that are coming out of this new way of thinking, I think. So, not just maybe targeting cardiovascular disease or any other disease through one specific mechanism of action, but if possible, trying to implement lots of different benefits. And so that's been a super cool way that we've been differentiating ourselves, I think.
I love the way of approaching that rather than so focusing on just one thing. Sometimes there's one symptom, but that could be caused by other root cause. So it sounds like your approach is more like looking at what are the holistic point of view, what could contribute to these symptoms too, so that the patient have a more chance to address other possible, the causes too, rather than just dealing just one thing. Because if we, without knowing the root cause, sometimes that symptom can come back again.
Well, what's exciting about my role is now being outside of R&D. Unfortunately, I'm not involved in how we search for them anymore. But thanks to all of the great data that's being developed from clinical programs and things, I get to share sort of that approach and discuss that with healthcare providers and see, it's been really cool to see how well received that's been. And this isn't actually something that's new. I feel like in healthcare, especially here in Canada, but elsewhere as well, trying to treat patients holistically or trying to tackle as many things as you can in potentially a limited amount of time has always been super important. right? And so I
Exactly.
think more options for our GPs, more options for, our specialists as well, our nurses, about how can that be done is going to only benefit patients at the end of the day. And so it's been cool to be part of sort of seeing that messaging has always been there. It's just maybe now there are more tools from a number of different companies that allow them to do that, which is super cool.
Yeah, that is amazing. So what is the one of the biggest challenges you had to overcome in your career?
Wow, great question. So, I think if you speak to anyone who's gone through any additional education, especially graduate school, there's a lot of challenges that come with that. So, the majority of my training was in research and development, and it's one of the few jobs that you can have where you fail 95% of the time. In most jobs, if you did the wrong thing 95% of the time, you'd quickly be fired. But that's one thing about research where it's just the norm. And so, especially in medical therapies and development, you make a lot of great potential molecules that never see the light of day. They never make it to the clinic. And so, really developing a mindset where, accepting what is traditionally known as failure, or taking that and being able to grow from it and having something that you can learn and move forward with, is probably one of the hardest lessons that I've had to learn. Right, we all would prefer if things were easy and they could work on the first or second try, but whether it's chemistry, biology, or any other type of science, this is the whole thing behind research, is that you need to learn to overcome these sort of obstacles and move forward with, actually learn from them. And so a big portion of the challenges that I've had to learn came out of grad school, especially. And I think one of the best things is having a good support network, both within your teams and then outside of work. It's so important to try and realize that work-life balance is something that people need, right? You can't just work your way through everything. And so having those supports is super, super important. One of the probably other challenges that I learned, unfortunately, towards the end of my PhD, was that there wasn't as much R&D opportunities available for me here in Canada. Part of that was compounded because of the pandemic, but part of it, unfortunately, was just because there is other funding and other opportunities elsewhere in the world. And so that's one of the reasons I did seek work in California and in the US. These are sort of the biotech hubs in the San Francisco Bay Area, San Diego, and Boston. And really, I think what was one of the big challenges was trying to figure out a way where I could use my skill set and come back and benefit Canada. We have an amazing education system here. We have amazing people and trainees, and we don't want them to necessarily have to leave Canada. Or if they do, to get some additional training, finding ways that they can come back. And so that's a challenge as well. When my family's based in Canada, right, your friends and things, and taking that sacrifice of going somewhere else and to learn and to train somewhere. And I think what we need to do is try and make sure that we have routes and avenues for those folks who go get trained in the best places and then bring that back to Canada. And that's how we can benefit a lot of our industries, whether it's healthcare, tech, financial, agriculture, whatever it might be. So yeah, some main challenges are sort of how do you bounce back from defeat or from failure, and then finding out what the clearest route is to get the best training you can to be successful here in Canada. I think that was something that took me some time to learn.
Wow, yeah, that's a very inspiring story. Thank you so much for sharing with us. Um, so let's touch on a little bit about your financial success. So sounds like things are going very well with you and your business, and a lot of medical professionals are looking toward the future and looking at how they can create a real passive monthly cash flow, especially during those hard times that inflations and uncertainties in the economy. And what are your thoughts to like enhance or even replace your current active income? Do you have any
Yeah,
thoughts?
no, I think I think, again, we're kind of in a state right now of instability, like you had mentioned, with inflation and things like that. And so that kind of stable aspect of financial income can be tricky to try and secure, right? Or try to expand even. And I think that, so I grew up with, my mother was a nurse and my father was a contractor. And they used to always say there were three things that would always keep you in business. People need homes, people need to eat, and people will get sick. And so I quickly learned I was not cut out to be a contractor or do manual labor. And so I decided to go towards the science side and the medical side. And so finding an industry, right, that's, I think, going to be long-term and that will always be around is important. We're here in Alberta, right? So we're very used to kind of cyclical economic cycles, but there are some that can be sort of more straight line and definitely can provide, I think, long-term benefit. And one of the cool things that you can always do in kind of today's world, which is definitely a more global and sort of virtual or hybrid world, is think about different opportunities where you could leverage some of the work that is being done or opportunities in other countries and see what you can do from Canada. So I know a lot of people who do consulting work, me as well, right? This is, I think, a great opportunity to leverage the experiences that we have, the education that we have in other avenues that might not be kind of considered traditional or as readily available, right? You might not learn as much about consulting through some of your traditional university degrees, but you could look at lots of VC firms are out there, lots of different firms who are looking at the new biotech stage, and there's lots of room for growth with these new companies that constantly keep pumping up. So yeah, I think that one of the big things in the medical field is there's always going to be some work. So find the niche that's right for you. Because as much as, we need to think about our financial aspect, there has to be a point where you get up in the morning and you enjoy the work that you do. And we still need to be able to live our life. But consulting has definitely been something that I think could open up a lot of doors for a lot of different people, especially given the sort of virtual aspect to it for Canadians here to work in those other markets that maybe they felt they couldn't get into or break into just given the geography. Yeah.
Awesome. One of our question was, what would you give tips for someone wanting to get into that very competitive medical industry? But I think you already gave us a lot of good advices. Thank you so much. As we are wrapping up our interview, what exciting plans or initiatives do you have in the work for the next 6 to 12 months?
Yeah. And so I think it's just a really exciting time in the cardiovascular space for sure. I mean, I'm just going to speak to the whole disease area, right? A number of amazing companies are doing really great things. And so, we're always trying to be positive and hope that every readout goes great because that will just give more options to patients. And so I think that we're going to see a really exciting 2026 in the cardiorenal space from a number of companies that are going to be looking at tackling these chronic diseases from a lot of different avenues. And so that's a super exciting thing to think about. I'm looking forward to all of the big readouts around the world. So there's obviously plenty in the US and big conferences in Europe, but we always have a big Canadian meeting here as well. And so I think that we're going to see a lot more of these international figures coming here as well and talking about these sort of things. So I'm really excited to see Canada play big on this stage.
Awesome. Yeah, looking forward to hearing more about, stories from you. And okay, so thank you so much for your time today and sharing some of your great insights and tips with us. Do you have any last comments you would like to give to our audience before the end of the show?
Just again, a huge thank you to you and the organizers for including myself here. Maybe not the more typical kind of interviewee that you have on your show, but I think that this podcast is really highlighting great things happening in Canada, in the West here as well. So, big shout out to you guys, but thank you to yourself, the organizers, the listeners. And yeah, this has just been really fun. So I appreciate it.
Thank you. Awesome. So James, if people would like to connect with you, how they can get a hold of you?
Yeah, LinkedIn is usually the best way. And so James Papatzimas, I'm sure that we'll see, we can share a link or something as well, but LinkedIn would be one of the best ways. Yeah, feel free to connect. And it's always a great idea to grow your network.
Awesome. Thank you so much, James, again. It was a great show. Okay.
Thank you, Amy.
Thanks.
Want to share your success story? Apply to be a guest at truenorthsuccessshow.com/guest. We'd love to hear from you.